Hello, and welcome to the Community Forum, presented by the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. My name is Kevin Nerney. I'm the Executive Director of the Council, and our goal is to share news, information, and insights on key topics that are important to people with developmental disabilities. Today, our topic is advocating for change, testifying at the State House. Our guests today are Christina Battista.
Hi.
And Robert Marshall. Can you guys introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure, so thank you for having me. My name is Christina Battista, and I work for Skills for Rhode Island's Future as a supported employment coordinator, where I help individuals look for employment opportunities.
Hi, my name is Bob Marshall. I work with the Developmental Disabilities Council at the State House with trying to get legislation passed, and do that 3 or 4 days a week.
Great. So today we're going to talk about legislation and how to advocate for laws. Where do your rights to testify and to ask the government to do something, where do those rights come from? What's the process? How does a law become a law? How does a bill become a law? How do you make your voice heard? Who are your elected officials, and how do you find out when and how bills are going to be heard at the State House? So the first question, where do your rights to even ask the government to do anything come from?
It basically comes from the First Amendment, in that you have the right to assemble and you have the right to speak and to address the government. And so you can ask them to do things that you think would make your life better, or help someone else that you want to help.
And also, if you don't agree with a certain law, you always have the right to petition it as well.
Beyond the First Amendment, are there other reasons or other things that give us the ability to go testify and talk to our elected officials?
Well, they're elected officials, for one thing, and they want to get reelected in most cases. So that kind of gives you a right to speak with them, because they're going to be looking for you to vote for them down the line, and by helping you get what you need, that's the reason they're there.
Great. And Christina, you mentioned your work at Skills, but you also testify quite a bit up at the State House, don't you?
I do, yes.
And you find that the legislators generally are appreciative that people are there testifying?
Absolutely. They really need to hear what it's like for everybody in the state of Rhode Island, how these laws are going to affect people. For myself, I've gone many times to talk about different laws that affect myself, my personal care assistant, my colleagues. So it's really important that your voice gets heard on any level. And
Bob, you said you're up there quite a bit.
Yes.
So you must see a lot of laws come through, or potential laws come through, bills. What makes a law or a potential law a good law?
Well, one accomplishes something that's worthwhile, and the other thing that really people forget about, but you really need to focus on, is in fixing one thing, you don't want to unintentionally break something else. So that you have to be careful with some laws that, they have very good intent and they're going to do this, but just because of the way they're worded, they might unintentionally take a right away from someone else, or make life more difficult for someone else, or open up a threat to people's well-being.
So if there is a potential bill or a law that does need to get through, what's the process? How does that work? How does something go from an idea to a law?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, as an idea, you can just present it to your rep or your senator, and if they agree with you, they'll take it forward from there. Or you can start trying to look at how it would be written out as a law, and you can go to any length on that. You can write up a theory, or you could write a potential law yourself. You don't have to do any of those. You can just say, this is what I want, and have someone else write it. But if you want to be real specific, you can.
I've actually had somebody where they were not in my specific city, but a law was coming out that I really wanted to express my opinions on. And I actually called one of them, and he actually met with me at a local coffee shop just to hear what my concerns were.
Oh, great. So this is outside of the testifying process.
Yes.
You also have access to your elected officials just on a normal, everyday basis, as long as they're willing to meet with you, which
Absolutely,
it sounds
yes.
like this person was.
Yes.
That's great. Bob, you mentioned you take it to a rep or a senator. Can you talk a little bit more about why there are representatives and why there are senators?
Well, there we have what is called a bicameral government, which means there are two houses. Almost all states have that. There are a couple that only have one, but for the most part, it's just like the federal government. There are two separate chambers, and they both act a little differently, but you have to get the laws through both of them for them to become law.
And it does have to go through the legislature. This isn't something necessarily that a governor could do, or a president, or justices of either the Rhode Island Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So for a law to become a law, it has to go through the legislature. And as you described, there are the two houses, the House and the Senate. Are there people in the legislature that are better to go through if you're trying to get a law passed than others? Are there people with more authority than other people, or are all reps the same and all senators the same?
Well, in theory, they're all the same. But in actuality, as with all things in life, some people tend to rise to a level where they have more authority and more power. And also some people are better at getting things done than other people are. And so you need to figure that out to have your law have a better chance of passing. So there's a hierarchy in the two chambers. In the Senate, the president is the person with the most power, and he's the president of the Senate. And in the House, there's the Speaker of the House, and then it kind of comes down from there, where there are leaders and whips, which are below that, and then there are committee chairs that have quite a bit of authority over the bills that are in their specific committee. But the ultimate decisions get made by the Speaker and the President as to what's going to happen with a bill.
So not only with the bill, they can make other rules as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different rules that come through the Senate or the House?
Sure. Any session, there are some standing rules, and then each session, the Speaker or the President may put some more rules on. The case in point is in the session that we're in right now, the Speaker had decided that last year they dealt with way too many bills, and so he put a limit on this year that each representative can only introduce 15 bills. So some of the representatives may have introduced 20 or 30 bills the previous year. They may even have more than 15 bills that didn't pass last year that they were planning on put back in. They had to go through and prioritize those bills and decide which 15 they were going to submit. If the bill you're working on wasn't one of those, you had to go find someone else to put it in for you that didn't have 15 bills, which is something that is doable because it varies how much legislation each person puts in.
On top of rules limiting the amount of bills, are there rules around timing and when a bill can be introduced?
There are standing rules in both chambers as to when the last day is that you can introduce a new bill and that kind of thing. What changes from session to session, similar to the 15 limit, is whether those rules are going to be strictly enforced or laxly enforced. And in most cases, they're laxly enforced, but we saw a case last year where the Senate decided that their deadline for submission was hard and fast, and not one bill was allowed to come in after that deadline. That had not happened in anyone's memory, and we actually had a bill that didn't get in because of that.
And so it sounds like the leadership can set rules, but they can also bend those rules if they feel like they want to. But they don't always, and sometimes they strictly enforce
like
them.
With that rule I was just describing, the normal course in both chambers has been always, and was even last year in the House, that if the minority and the majority leader said okay, the bill could be introduced after the deadline. So you had to take one more step, but you still put a bill in. But last year in the Senate, even with both of them saying okay, it wouldn't go in.
So speaking of timing, if you don't get a bill in time, or if it goes through and it just doesn't pass by the time the legislature leaves, and can you talk about when they come in and when they leave? But what happens to a bill if nothing happens to it at the end of a session?
It doesn't exist anymore. And so you start again with the same process all over. And, you try to learn something from what happened the previous year. If there was a reason why it didn't go anywhere, you can try to adapt the bill to address that reason. But you basically start over every year.
So what are your timeframes for working with the legislature in a given year?
So the legislature comes into session right after New Year's Day. It's usually either the 2nd or 3rd of January that they come into session. And they tend to adjourn somewhere around the end of July after they pass the budget, around the end of June, I'm sorry. The budget is has to be in place by July 1st because that's when it starts. Pretty much once the budget gets passed, they will only stay in session another 3-4 days, maybe a week.
Okay, so you've essentially got from beginning, middle of January to end of June, maybe a couple days beyond that.
Right.
So what happens if you get a bill in the House? It goes to a committee to be heard, right, where testimony will be heard, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. What happens after that committee hears it? How does a bill get passed?
So the committee hears the bill, and either, there'll be people saying that they're in favor of it, or there'll be people saying they're against it, or there'll be both, or there'll be the other option is people come in and say they kind of like it, but there's this little piece that they're not comfortable with. And in that situation, the committee chair would usually tell them to work with the sponsor and see if they can come up with a compromise that everyone would be okay with. Then the committee at some point will either decide to let the bill die and nothing will happen, or they will bring it forward for what's called consideration. And that consideration, if it was a situation where there was going to be some changes, a substitute bill is put in its place that addresses those changes. Or if there weren't, then the original bill gets considered and sent to the House floor for a vote with a recommendation from the committee that it pass.
And so it goes from the smaller group, which is the committee, to the whole House of Representatives.
Or the Senate.
But if it's in the House votes for it, say they do vote in favor of it. Are we done?
No.
So what has to happen after it gets through the House?
So you have to have an identical bill pass in the Senate. And it goes through the same process. Their committee will hear it. They can consider it and put something in its place, or they can pass it as is, or they can let it die in committee. If they send it to the floor for a recommendation for passage and the Senate passes it, then the Senate bill is now passed. That House bill, when it passed in the House, would have been sent over to the Senate. And when that Senate bill passes, it'll be sent over to the House. They both then have to pass each other's bills, and without them changing anything, because they have to stay identical to each other.
Okay, so this sounds a little different than my understanding at like the federal level.
Yes, it's very different.
So both houses have to pass an identical bill, and then
both houses have to pass the other house's identical bill.
Okay, well that sounds pretty complicated. But what happens if you can't get this far?
If you can get through all of that, at that point it goes, both of those bills will be sent to the governor. And the governor has three options. He can have a signing ceremony and sign the bill, and the minute he signs it, it becomes law. He would sign both of them so that both the House and the Senate can claim that it was their bill. Or his second option is he can put it in his pocket for 7 days. And that's what's called a pocket veto, but it's not really a veto. It means that he's not going to say he's in favor of it, but he's going to let it become law without signing it. And on the 7th day that he hasn't done anything, it becomes law. Or the last one is he can veto the bill. Within that 7-day period, he can sign something saying that he is vetoing the bill and send it back to the House and the Senate.
Okay, and if he does send it back, what happens there? Is it dead for good, or?
No, they have the opportunity to decide if they want to take it up again. And if they take it up again, they need to pass it again in both chambers with a 3/5 majority. and then it becomes law. They override the governor's veto and they force it into law without him.
Okay, great. So that's essentially a seemingly more complex than other states of the national government way of passing a law in Rhode Island.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned the committees and that they hold hearings. Is this where the public gets involved?
Yes.
Okay. And what is that like? Can either one of you kind of describe a little bit about a committee hearing?
You've done quite a bit of that, Christina.
I have. So basically, you go and you testify in front of who's there, and you talk about how this bill is going to affect you personally. It's always best to go ahead and be prepared. So sometimes sending in a written testimony and followed up by your personal testimony inside where you're actually getting to talk to the legislators. They really just want to hear your story. They want to see how it's going to affect you.
What are the rooms like? How many different committees are there about?
There are about roughly 12 or 15 committees in each of the, and don't hold me to that, but that's my guess. About 12 or 15 in each chamber. They divide things up a little differently. Some of them are the same, like they both have a judiciary committee, and usually a bill that's in one judiciary committee will be in a judiciary committee in the other. Sometimes it's not, but then some of them, it's like we put education and human services together in one, and the other one has education and human services separate. So the committees don't line up perfectly, chamber to chamber. They make their own decisions on what their committee is going to be. So the bill gets assigned to a committee in each chamber, and that committee deals with it.
Okay, and Christina, you mentioned you go and you testify, but you also said something about written testimony. So do you usually do both? You hand something in and you speak, or how do you normally handle that?
So I have not sent in written testimony. Usually I go and just speak from the heart, but it is best to go and present your written testimony ahead of time, and that way you don't lose your thoughts. So because sometimes people get very nervous speaking in front of people. It can be sometimes a little overwhelming because there are a lot of people coming in and out. There's room changes very quickly. You think you're going to be in one room, and the next minute you're in another room testifying. So it's always best to be prepared.
Right. It also helps to put in written testimony because you're going to notice when you're there that many of the legislators that are sitting on the committees are on multiple committees, and they'll be going in and out too. And very seldom are all of them in the room when you get your few minutes to testify. So, but they all get the written testimony, so it's worth putting it in for that reason too.
Is there anything that you should focus on while testifying? Is there anything that you should avoid while testifying?
Really not being biased one way or the other, not personally attacking anybody, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a bill that's going to affect everyone. So you really just want to speak from the heart, whether it's going to affect you positively or negatively.
That's actually really good advice, and I got myself into trouble once. I went to testify, and the legislator had been misinformed and made a statement that wasn't quite true. And instead of just trying to clear it up with them afterwards, I kind of pointed out that they were wrong, and it turned into a back and forth. And that definitely does not go over well at all. So mistakes learned, and hopefully I'm a little bit better for it. How long do these hearings usually last?
They can run pretty long. I've been at the State House sometimes up until 8, 9 o'clock at night. I would say be prepared to bring snacks if you need to, water. You can be there for a very long time.
Right, you can be, and it depends how many bills are on the agenda, but that isn't necessarily all that determines it, because some bills you'll see will have one, maybe no people testifying, and some bills will have 40, 50 people wanting to testify, and they will all be allowed to testify. So, and you don't know if your bill's going to, even if you're pretty sure there aren't going to be a lot of people testifying on your bill, you don't know when it's going to come up. You may be before or after that other bill. So
you don't know how late you're going to be there. How early do you have to get there before?
Okay. So on a day that there's not a session, it's easy because the the committee meeting is scheduled at a specific time and usually starts within 15 or 20 minutes of that time. So as long as you're there, if it says it's going to start at 2 o'clock, you should try to get there by 1:45 so you can have time to sign in wanting to testify before the hearing starts, because it could start right at 2 o'clock, but it usually will start by 2:10, 2:15. They have to wait till they have a quorum, so if someone's running late, they need to wait. So that's why you're not sure when it's going to start. On a day that there is a legislative session, the committees meet after the session, and you will see when you go to look to see what time the committee meeting is, it'll say that the meeting is at the RISE.
What does the RISE mean?
The RISE doesn't mean anything. The RISE means that it's going to happen after the session. The session, like the committees, might have 1 or 2 bills. It might have 10, 15 bills that they're dealing with. But even then, again, even when there's one bill, if it's a controversial bill, they could argue for a long time before they get around to voting. And also, they don't tend to start their sessions on time, so even that piece moves. So basically, if it's at the RISE, what I always tell people is almost never will happen before 4:30 because the sessions tend to scheduled to start at 4 o'clock. If you're there by 4:30, you're safe, but it might not start until 5:30, even 6 o'clock. There's no way of knowing that in advance.
So get there early, be prepared to stay late.
Yes.
Is there anything else people should know about going to the State House?
Absolutely.
What to expect?
So I'm going to say the parking, always take that into consideration. So for myself, parking has to be fairly close. There's very limited handicap parking in the back of the building. And lots of times when I've gone, there's just not enough handicap parking. So you either need to have somebody drop you off, so that takes time, or you need to find a spot and circle around many times. But it can be very tricky.
And is that the same entrance? Because there's a separate entrance, correct?
There is an entrance in the back where you can go up a ramp and take the elevator to whatever floor you need to go to.
Okay. Anything else people should know about going into the State House? And
You're going to have either entrance, either the accessible entrance or the main entrance, which is on Smith Street. You are going to be screened. You have to go through a metal detector. It's easier if you don't bring metal because their metal detector is fairly sensitive, and so if you don't want to play the airport game and be taking belts off and that kind of thing, don't bring a lot of metal
I
that
do
you
have to
don't
take my
need.
belt off every
Yes,
single time.
most people that have a big belt buckle do, so that's why I wear suspenders.
So you talked about maybe bringing water, snacks. What about just and when I say atmosphere, I actually mean the heat in some of those, or coldness in some of those rooms. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I've been there in the summer and just for different things, and it can be very hot, but in the winter it can also be very cold. It really depends, so wear layers, and that way you can take off whatever you need to.
In the winter, it can also be very hot in some
True.
rooms. You can go into one committee room and it is sweltering, and then you can go in, move across the hall to another committee and it is cold.
Right. So some of the rooms have air conditioners, although most don't. I
Right.
think, but
Yep.
but some do have air conditioners.
And you're sitting so close to other people, so naturally the body heat from other people is going to make you very warm. So that's the other thing. If you're a little uncomfortable being close to somebody, just be prepared for that. Maybe take some stress balls with you if you need to. Whatever is going to help alleviate the
So
anxiety.
seating can be an issue as well.
It can be, yeah. Sometimes you even have to sit outside in the hall just because there's not enough seating.
And what would they do then if you're signed up to testify, but you're not in the room?
They'll come out in the hall and call
Oh.
your name. So
And there's been times where I've actually forgotten to sign up, so it's very important to remember as soon as you walk in that room, you put your name on that list.
And where do you sign up to testify? So you get to the State House, you find the right room. You're there in time.
Usually there's a table outside the door before the meeting where you can sign up. If you're late and the meeting's already started, you have to find the clerk and ask her to go get the sign-in sheets back from the chair, because the chair will have them at that point.
Okay.
You can't approach the chair yourself. So you have to ask the clerk to go and get you the sign-in sheet so you can sign in.
And if you need anything additional, like an accommodation, is the clerk is the correct person to go to?
Right. You should let the clerk know. You should try to let them know ahead of time, like a day or two ahead of time, if possible. If you don't know you're going until last minute, then don't not go because of that, and just insist that they accommodate you. But it's a lot easier if you do it a day or two ahead of time and give them the time to get whatever you need in place.
Well, that sounds both exciting and potentially exhausting to do this, but
And fun.
I'm sure it can be fun. But as Christina, as you pointed out when we started this, it's really, really important that the legislators hear personal stories. I've gone and testified on some things. It's not the same as coming from a person who's living the experience, and that's really important. But it also sounds like it's complex, especially as far as timing goes, finding the right room, knowing who your legislator is. So I'm going to give out a couple of websites people can go to for help if they need to. The first one, if you do want to find out who your legislator is, you can go to vote.sos.ri.gov. That's the Secretary of State's website. And they have all your information there. You just put in your name, your birthday, and your zip code, and it'll show you who's representing you at the state and local level. It'll show you upcoming elections, all of that stuff. You can go to rilegislature.gov, and there you can find the committee calendars, what's going to be heard that day. You can track bills, although sometimes that's difficult. And also, if you are having trouble finding what you're looking for, you can contact us. Call the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council, email, or go to our website. Our website is riddc.org. You can email us at riddc@riddc.org, or you can call us, and we'll be happy to help you in any way we can to get up to the State House to inform you of bills. And our telephone number is 401-737-1238. That'll do it for today. Thank you very much. Until next time.